Something interesting often happens in the garden that most people never notice at first. You can look at a plant for weeks and think nothing is really happening. The leaves stay small. The stems do not seem to change much. Above the soil, everything looks slow and quiet, almost disappointing. But then, when the season shifts or the right time comes, you dig gently into the soil and find something completely different. Strong roots. Full vegetables. Food that was growing the whole time, just hidden from view. It can feel surprising because it almost seems backward. The weakest looking plants above the ground often turn out to be the most productive underneath. There is a strange kind of contrast here. Nothing impressive is happening on the surface for weeks, and then suddenly the soil reveals a full harvest that was building silently the entire time. Some of these underground crops are so dependable and rich that they can quietly replace things you usually buy from the store. Not all at once, and not in a dramatic way, but slowly and steadily over time. If this feels a little confusing, that is very common. Many gardeners never notice what is happening below the soil because most of our attention naturally goes to leaves, flowers, or fruit. But in reality, a large part of plant life is happening underground, out of sight. You are not doing anything wrong if you have never focused on it before. In fact, most people don't. Before explaining why this happens, it helps to understand what is really going on beneath the surface and why some of the most important food plants in the world choose to grow quietly under the soil instead of showing everything above it. A lot of everyday food actually begins its journey in a place we rarely think about. When people imagine a garden, they often picture green leaves, tall stems, or colorful fruits. It makes sense because that is what catches the eye. But for many plants, the real action is happening below ground level. Root vegetables and underground crops grow in silence. There is no bright display to signal progress. No flowers to admire during the growing stage. Instead, the plant slowly builds energy downward, storing nutrients in the soil where it is protected. Because of this hidden growth, many beginners assume that nothing important is happening at all. They may even worry that their garden is not working. This is a common misunderstanding. Growth does not always mean visible change. In many cases, the plant is working harder underground than it is above it. The leaves may look simple, but they are quietly feeding the roots below. Over time, those roots become the food we harvest. Another important point is that underground crops store energy in a different way than fruits. Fruits are designed for reproduction and visibility. They want to be seen, eaten, and spread. Root crops are different. They are built for storage and survival. They gather energy slowly and keep it safe underground, away from heat, cold, and animals. This is why some gardens can look quiet on the surface but still produce a strong harvest below. It is a different kind of growth system, one that rewards patience more than constant attention. Once you start noticing this pattern, you begin to realize that many of the foods you already know are part of this hidden underground world. In fact, you may already be growing some of them without thinking much about what is happening beneath the soil. Plants like common root vegetables are often seen as simple or ordinary. People plant them, wait a while, and then harvest them without much thought. But each of these plants is part of a much larger system of underground food production that has been used for centuries. For example, some of the most familiar garden foods grow entirely below the surface while only showing their leaves above ground. Others develop slowly over time, quietly expanding in the soil while the gardener focuses on watering or general care. What is interesting is that these familiar crops are only a small part of a much wider group of underground plants. There are many more varieties that behave in similar ways, storing energy below the surface and providing steady food once harvested. When people first realize this, it often changes how they see their garden. What once looked like a simple patch of plants begins to feel more like a hidden storage system. You are not just growing leaves or stems. You are growing something that is building food slowly beneath your feet. The surprising part is that this system is already familiar to many gardeners, even if they do not fully recognize it yet. The real story is not about new plants appearing, but about understanding what has been there all along. To understand why these plants behave this way, it helps to look at how they survive in nature. Plants are not just growing for food production. They are also trying to survive changing weather, dry soil, and even animals that might eat them. Storing food underground is one of the safest strategies a plant can use. The soil acts like a natural protection layer. It keeps the stored energy safe from heat during hot seasons and insulated during cold weather. It also hides the food from many pests that would normally damage leaves or fruit. In dry conditions, underground storage becomes even more important. When water is limited, the plant can slow down above ground while protecting its energy below. In colder climates, the soil helps prevent sudden damage from frost. This is why underground crops are often more reliable in changing environments. There is also an important survival advantage here. Even if the visible part of the plant is damaged, the underground part can still remain safe and alive. This allows the plant to recover when conditions improve. At this point, it becomes clear that underground food is not just something humans discovered for eating. It is actually a survival system that plants developed over time. We are simply harvesting the result of that strategy. As you start to see this pattern, it becomes easier to understand why there are so many different underground crops across the world. Some grow in cold regions, others in warm climates. Some take a short time to mature, while others need a full season or longer. These crops are not rare or unusual. In fact, they are spread across almost every type of climate where people grow food. What changes is how they develop and how long they take to become ready for harvest. Many gardeners are surprised when they realize just how wide this group actually is. It is not just a few familiar plants. It is a large family of crops that all share the same hidden growth behavior. Each one stores energy below the soil in its own way, shaped by its environment. As this understanding grows, so does curiosity. People often begin to realize that there are likely many underground crops they have never tried before, even if they have been gardening for years. The diversity is much larger than expected, and it often takes time to fully appreciate it. At this point, one of the most common issues gardeners face becomes important to understand. It is not about how to grow these crops, but about when to harvest them. Many people make the same mistake without realizing it. They judge the plant based on what they see above ground. If the leaves look healthy, they assume the plant is still growing. If the leaves start to fade, they assume it is too late. But underground crops do not always follow that pattern. The real development is happening below the soil, where it cannot be seen. This means timing becomes less about appearance and more about understanding the plant's natural cycle. Harvesting too early can result in smaller, less developed food. Waiting too long in some cases can also reduce quality. This is why patience and observation matter more than quick decisions. It is not a matter of doing more work. It is about learning to read the right signals. As we go deeper into this idea, there is an important insight that often surprises even experienced gardeners. Most of the growth in underground crops happens long before anything becomes visible above the soil. For weeks, sometimes even longer, the plant is quietly building its underground structure. The energy from the leaves is being transferred downward. The soil is slowly filling with stored nutrients. But from the surface, it may look like almost nothing is happening. This creates a natural misunderstanding. People assume that visible growth means progress. But in underground crops, the most important work happens when nothing exciting is visible at all. The real strength of these plants comes from this hidden period. It is a slow and steady process that cannot be rushed. Once you understand this, it changes how you view your garden completely. Even if the surface looks quiet, the system below can be full of activity. It is a reminder that not all progress can be seen right away. Another important advantage of underground crops is how well they adapt to different climates and soil conditions. Because they are protected beneath the surface, they can handle changes in temperature more easily than many other plants. In hot weather, the soil helps keep them cool. In cold weather, it helps protect them from sudden damage. Even when pests or animals affect the surface growth, the underground parts often remain safe. This makes them especially reliable for gardeners who face unpredictable weather. They offer a kind of stability that is not always possible with other types of crops. Understanding this can help reduce frustration in gardening. Sometimes a plant may look stressed above ground, but below the surface, it is still developing normally. Trusting this process becomes an important part of successful growing. If you are just starting with these kinds of crops, it helps to begin slowly. There is no need to rush or plant everything at once. A small number of plants is often enough to observe how they behave over time. The most important part is not constant activity, but steady observation. Watching how the plant changes through the season can teach more than any quick action. Watering gently, giving space, and allowing time are often more effective than trying to control every detail. These plants respond well to consistency rather than pressure. If you feel unsure at any point, that is completely normal. Every gardener learns through observation, not perfection. As you become more familiar with these patterns, you start to notice that gardening becomes less about effort and more about understanding timing. You begin to trust the slow process instead of trying to speed it up. If you are comfortable sharing, I am curious how often you usually check your garden soil when growing root vegetables. Many people realize they either check too often or not enough once they start paying attention to underground growth. In the end, the garden does not always reward constant action. It often responds better to patience, timing, and quiet observation. When you step back and allow the natural process to unfold, things tend to develop more smoothly. Sometimes the garden improves when we simply step back and observe.